under the Terrorist Expatriation Act, the State Department would be able to revoke the citizenship of an American who affiliates with a foreign terrorist organization or who fights against our country. And foreign terrorist organizations, as you're probably aware, are also designated according to statute by the State Department. The same due process that applies to the existing statute would apply to those whose citizenship is revoked under our proposed amendment to the law.
In other words, none. The senator arguing his law would prevent future Shahzads from returning to the country to attack us, apparently forgetting that no one knew about Shahzad's terrorist affiliations until after the bombing attempt. The plan so blatantly unconstitutional, even House Republican leader John Boehner was less concerned about America's safety than he was about the rights of the terrorists.
Well, I've not seen Senator Lieberman's legislation, but if they're a U.S. citizen until they're convicted of some crime, I don't know how you would attempt to take their citizenship away. It'd be pretty difficult under the U.S. Constitution.
Joining us now is Jonathan Turley, constitutional law professor at George Washington University Law School. Full disclosure here, Professor Turley is currently lead counsel on 2 terrorism cases. Professor Turley, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer came out today and said he believes this proposal by Senator Lieberman would be found to be unconstitutional. What's your view of it?
I think it's manifestly unconstitutional from what I've heard. I mean, among other things, it contradicts what the Supreme Court said in cases like Afroyim versus Rusk in 1967. The Supreme Court has said quite clearly the 14th Amendment was put into place to make citizenship permanent. The reason they put in the language of the 14th Amendment is they didn't want Congress to be able to strip freed slaves of their citizenship. So the whole thrust of the amendment, this is what the Supreme Court talked about in that decision, is to make it permanent. Now, the only way you can strip it is if you can show that someone acted in a way that shows their intent to renounce or give up their citizenship. So it's a very, very high standard. Now, we do have a provision, the 1481 provision, that does say that if you engage in armed struggle against the United States or treason, that those acts could be deemed as showing your intent to give up your citizenship. So you do have a provision like that. What Senator Lieberman is suggesting, in my view, is not just unconstitutional, it's un-American. I mean, this is something that goes to the core of this country. You can't just create stateless people because you believe that they're associated with organizations that an agency is deemed to be a terrorist organization.
That belief of association is the thing that makes this, frankly, a top-of-the-show story for me, that makes this such an almost unbelievable proposal from supposedly serious members of Congress. I mean, the government now determines who it thinks are terrorist groups. There is a process by which it does that. Is there anything about that process that I know you know something about that tells us what kind of due process we could expect as citizens if this Lieberman idea goes through, that you lose your citizenship if they think you're associated with the wrong people?
Well, it's somewhat ironic, isn't it? Conservatives are constantly complaining about big brother agencies, you know, not recognizing deductions on their tax forms, and yet they would give an agency the authority to strip you of your citizenship. They must think very highly of the quality of work coming out of these federal agencies. The fact is that we have a system now of designating organizations as terroristic or terroristic associated. That process has been renounced. It is a very flawed process. There's very few due process protections. We've seen a lot of abuses. You don't get the same rights. You can see evidence that's used that are very, very questionable. The agency gets a great deal of deference. And so what happens is this magnifies the problem. First, you have an agency that determines an organization is a terrorist organization. That's already a highly controversial process. Then you have another agency say, we're determining that you're associated with such an organization to compound the agency process. It's a very dangerous concept. Unfortunately, the Constitution won't allow it.
You represent the rights of accused terrorists in courts, part of your legal practice. I wonder if you worry that that might mean you have associations with suspected terrorists, ties with terrorist groups. You worry that you're going to get your citizenship rights stripped by Joe Lieberman?
Well, I also consult with members of Congress, and after tonight, I'm more concerned with that association and what that might say about my future citizenship. You know, the thing is, Rachel, I'm so glad that you're drawing attention to this, because even though we can rely on our courts, I hope, to stand up to this type of legislation, declare it unconstitutional if it passes, we seem to be in this national trauma or fit. And it seems to be being translated in terms of attacking citizenship and questioning citizenship. And this, I think, is a very sad part of that. And I'm glad you're drawing attention to it, because it says something more about where we are right now as a country, and also perhaps what we should be focusing on instead.
I would only thank you for saying that. I would just add in closing that I agree with you, and I think that the sheer radicalness of these proposals and their both strategic and legal incoherence may mean that even as we're sort of having this fit about citizenship in this country, maybe that fit is in its last throes, possibly?
I would hope so.